Hello, and welcome to The Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. I'm bela.and.mike.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Today's guest on the podcast is Billie Shepard. She founded Billie Shepard Associates, where she leverages her acting experience and training methods into the business space. Her one-on-one coaching and group workshops help transform corporate speakers into influential leaders. We had a fascinating conversation on how many leadership speaking skills can be learned.
Bela, the main point here, and I think this is true for all of us, is we can all communicate better. So whether you're a leader or a speaker or, just like me, an average person, right? I think communication is something we all need to improve. I know I keep learning new tools and techniques, and I would say that communication is a big part of my job, right? And then the frustrating thing sometimes is just when I think I'm getting better, the audience changes, right? And what they expect, their expectation and their need changes, or the technologies change. And I think you made a great point when you started to talk about, you'll talk about in the interview with this whole COVID shift to online stuff. Well, it's a whole new set of technologies that we're using to communicate. How do we deal with that? So that's an important question. And then kind of the social norms and values change around the language that we use and the way we interact, both with physical space and with the types of words that we use and the phrasing that we use. And so I guess I'm always excited to learn about this topic. It's a cool topic, and it's one that's always changing. And this sounds like it's going to be a really interesting take on it. What do you think? Should we get right to it?
Yeah, sounds good, Mike.
All right. Looking forward to your interview with Billie Shepard next.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to the show. Today I have a great guest, Billie Shepard. She founded Billie Shepard Associates. And what she does there is she sort of leverages her acting experience and develops some training methods from that to help businesses transform their ability to lead and to grow the business and to become an influential leader in your industry and in your business. Welcome to the show, Billie.
Oh, Bela, good to be here with you.
Yeah, great. So let me start off with my first question. So if you're at a non-business related social event and you get introduced to somebody new, and after the introduction, they ask you, "Oh, nice to meet you, Billie. What do you do?" How do you answer that question?
Well, I gotta tell you, what I usually start with is I'm a presentation skills coach, and I use acting techniques to help speakers and communicators get in their power again.
Oh, excellent. So what is a presentation coach? What do you do, right?
I coach, I don't teach. There's a difference. Teaching to me is sort of lecturing and delivering information. My method is much more interactive. So it's coaching somebody to continue doing what they're doing well and help them adjust what's getting in the way of them being themselves and a good communicator. So I'm a coach.
Yeah.
I could be coaching tennis or piano lessons.
Okay. So why is this important? If someone's running a business or they're in a leadership position, or even if they're not in a leadership position, why is this important?
Who was the brilliant, was it Oscar Wilde, who said that the biggest misconception is people think they're being understood when they're communicating? I mean, there's this assumption that because words are coming out of our mouth, everybody's understanding it, and it's a misconception.
Yeah.
And so teaching others to communicate better and present better through acting techniques, because that's the method I learn and do, make sure that their message is being understood correctly.
Okay. Now, someone at first blush may say acting techniques, oh, jeepers, those people are pretending all the time. So are you going to teach me how to pretend better?
Well, in the beginning, I may, because the old act as if really is a productive way of learning a technique.
Mm-hmm.
To act as if I have confidence, to act as if I'm enjoying this, that all those sorts of things. But the naive attitude, and I mean that in the sweetest way, is that actors are pretending. Actors are pretending, but good actors are actually believing that they're in a moment. And they do that by getting on intention, which we can talk about later. Yeah. So what we go into acting as an amateur for the love of it, to pretend, to not be ourselves. And what the ironic thing becomes as we start getting better and start getting paid for doing it is pretending shows. So you can't pretend, you've got to be in that moment. And that takes, to get in the present moment, to be in that moment and believe it, takes the same techniques that a speaker or a leader needs.
Yes. So is a different way of maybe saying this is that you're helping people to make sure they're fully engaged in sort of the conversation, right? Because an actor, in order to make it look real, it has to be real. They need to be fully engaged in that dialogue. They need to be fully engaged in that moment, as you were saying. And so you're helping people focus that energy so that they can be fully engaged when they're talking one-on-one with somebody, or whether they're standing in front of an audience of 100 people.
Well, that was really well articulated, I have to say.
Oh.
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly it. And there are these time-tested techniques since Euripides and Aristotle that continue to work today, that actors and performers practice. And the people that I help in these corporations are people that have spent their life learning science or learning mechanics or engineering or other things, and they're good at that. And so these techniques may be new to them, but they work.
Yeah. And I think, I'm an engineer, trained engineer. So I know sometimes I lose sight of the fact that just the facts or just the science is not enough to move the conversation. You need more. You need to be more engaged. You just can't lay out the Excel spreadsheet and say, okay, here it is. You need to help people understand it. In order to help people understand things, you got to be engaged. You got to be sort of have that dialogue. So I certainly could have used some of your coaching early in my career, and I can continue to use it. I'm sure about that. Yeah. I will say you're actually the third person that we've had on this podcast that is sort of in this space. And what I mean by that is back on episode 38, a guy by the name of Rob Salfa, who was a mime street performer.
Oh.
Right. And then he transitioned into sort of management and leadership consultation. And then there was another person, Kat Coppett, back on episode 29. And she used improv techniques. She started a consulting business, helping people by using improv techniques and again, helping people get in the moment, get focused, and being 100% committed to what they're doing. So I think this is a really important topic. And that's why I was really heartened when you and I got introduced and to have you on the show.
Oh, that's fantastic. And of course, we use improvisation games and lessons in the beginning stages of the training. It's very important. I have to tell you, as an aside, the first professional job I ever got as an actor, there was a call for a mime. And I thought, oh, okay. And I went in and they said, do something. And I, of course, wasn't a mime. I just had a huge ego and confidence at that young age. And I sat down and I sewed a quilt and I got the job because I was so focused. And then we did these shows as a mime and I learned a ton. Both being a mime and learning improvisational techniques are ways of getting someone present by getting them clear on their intention.
Yeah.
And then when we're clear on our intention, there's no room for fear or nerves or self-doubt. Intention is the key.
Yeah.
What the heck is a goal? Yeah.
So let's say I called you up and I said, "Hey, Billie, people have been telling me I'm not doing a great job communicating. I need some help." Talk me through sort of, the process that we would go through, sort of how you would evaluate the skills that I have, make an assessment, and then where you move from there.
Well, that's a good way to start. If it's a workshop, it's done one way, and I can address that if I don't talk too long. If it's a private session, I begin with a diagnostic evaluation, which sounds terrifying and horrible, and it's really not. It's much like what you and I have been doing before this interview started and as we're doing now. But it is a diagnostic to see what one is doing well and where they need adjustments. And I start with chatting a bit, and then to the breathing exercise, and then a breathing exercise, and then I describe to them the format. And the format is it was grad school where they said they had known my work at the university I went to. And they said, when you see someone in the present moment and when they're being brilliant, but how can it become teachable for this thesis? What are the components, they said, of someone actually being in the present moment? So when I'm working with somebody privately, I introduce them to those 4 components that we'll be working with. And they are the body. Am I thirsty? Am I tense? Are my knees shaking? What's going on? Are my shoulders stiff? What's going on with my body? The second thing is the voice. Am I loud enough? Do I have clear diction? Is my modulation working? Do I have a problem with something else in my voice? The third component is improvisation, the ability to improvise. So we do some improvisational work. And the fourth component, which I end up calling the secret of life, and it really is the audience magnet, the intention. What the heck do I want here? Mm-hmm. What is my goal?
Yeah.
So it's body, voice, improvisation, and intention. And then I have somebody tell a story. And by that time, I'm getting a handle and they're getting on a handle, heuristically, what's working for them and what's not. Because I continue to ask questions and they'll say, my throat got dry or I was talking too fast. Now, here's the thing. Then I'm getting them addicted, don't you see? I'm a drug dealer, so to speak. I'm getting them addicted to feeling themselves with an awareness of when they're present and when they're not. And then they can self-adjust.
Yes.
So that's how it begins.
And it sounds like from what you were saying that you do this either one-on-one or you do it in sort of a workshop environment where there's a group of individuals.
The workshop environment is 10 to 12 people online and 20 or so in person. And it starts very, very slow. And there's more group improvisation in the beginning. And there's more time to telling personal stories and bonding. And then at the very end, we get to the presentation and how to craft it and beginning and closing. The presentation is the thing that's the last. The preparation is the thing, like any sport or any instrument, any dancer, anything. It's the preparation.
Yeah. So you said just said something there that sort of got my mind thinking a little bit about this. You talked about online. And, the last 2.5 years of COVID has really changed the way we typically interact, right? Any important meetings prior to COVID would always be done face-to-face, right? You'd call a company meeting or, you go to someone's office. It was always done eyeball to eyeball, face-to-face. And COVID changed all of that. So how does that change sort of our ability to be in the moment, right? To be engaged and to do all the things that are really important in these types of interactions?
I can tell you my story. My story happens to be with a large company, Meta. And I've been with them for years, going in to do workshops and working with them. We love each other. Great company to work for and brilliant engineers. You guys they're the best. I just love you. They came to me and they said, well, of course, we've got to go online. And I said, no way. I don't want to do it. And they said, okay, we'll give you a project manager and she'll help you design this. And I have my assistant, who's been with me for decades. And we started, and of course it was a nightmare until we realized, wait a minute, actors have to go from stage to camera seamlessly. We spend years taking on-camera workshops. We spend years taking theater classes and workshops and experience and learning by doing. It's the same thing. Now everybody else has to go from in-person to on camera.
Yeah.
So we started incorporating the acting techniques for the camera. Now the beginning prep is still the same. They still have to breathe. They still have to do the vocal exercise with the pencil in the mouth. They still have to construct a concise story to tell. All of that's the same. But the delicious piece of it is learning how to love the camera. And by that I mean most actors that have longer careers start on the stage so they can learn to sustain a character for a long period of time. Many actors don't, but most long career actors have theater experience. And the camera, in the old days, we used to call it the green-eyed monster or the red-eyed monster, depending on the camera. It was terrifying. Then what happens is we begin loving the camera because we realize all the work that the camera does for us.
Mm-hmm.
And what we train people to do online and in my privates is to learn how to talk to the camera like we're speaking to one person, and when to drop a slide, and when to make an important point looking to camera, when to check the audience, when to come back. We teach them those camera techniques. That's part A. I know this is a long response, but I think it's important for your listeners. The second piece of it is how important the voice comes to be in these Zoom meetings. Mm-hmm. The voice has to have modulation. It has to have clarity.
Yeah.
It has to have your style. If you've got a dialect, that's fantastic. Just make sure you're clear. And pauses, the use of pauses.
Yeah. So when you sort of see people, let's just talk about this sort of online stuff. So since we're into it right now, do you have like 2 or 3 tips that you could give out to sort of, hey, this is what I see most people doing incorrectly, or incorrectly is the wrong word, but these are the 3 areas where people can improve the most?
I would say the 3 things would be learning to know when to not use a slide and when to talk directly to the camera, taking advantage of that benefit.
Yeah.
Because the audience, each person will think you're talking directly to them. That's how they feel it. The second thing is the voice that I mentioned.
And before you move to that one, what you just said, when you talk to the camera, each person will feel it. That's actually an advantage of being online, because you don't get that in an auditorium, right? You don't get that in a conference room.
Yes, it's a benefit. We call it the Zoom benefit. Each person feels it right in their gut. The second thing is, to make that even juicier, is the voice and the clarity, modulation, and use of pauses. I'm going to repeat that again because you know what I've noticed after teaching for 40 years and raising 2 children? People forget everything I say, Bill. They forget everything I say. So certain things I repeat, and when I get somebody to feel a certain way, they won't forget that. The clarity, the modulation, and the use of pauses are incredibly powerful tools. And the third thing is the secret of life, breathing. Before one clicks join meeting, they have to do this breathing exercise that we teach, because there's not an athlete or an actor or a performer on the planet that isn't taking a big, deep breath in and out and tensing and releasing before they perform.
Okay. Oh, that was really good. Hopefully those are helpful. I know certainly I will keep those and try to remember them as long as I can. And if I forget them, I can always come back to this podcast and listen to it. So if I remember correctly, did you also write a book?
I wrote a book.
Yeah. Tell us about it.
You can see this book. That's me.
Okay.
Your listeners can't see the book, but they can get it on Amazon. And it's called The Billie Shepard Presentation Method. And I tried all of these titles that were clever and wonderful, but the bottom line was, this is my method. Yeah. And even though I may not be famous, this is the method that it's called. So it's a Billie Shepard Presentation Method on Amazon.
Very good. I will make sure that information is in the show notes so people can find that.
Well, thanks.
Do you have a sort of a sweet spot from an organization size or other type of characteristics that you tend to focus on with people? What I mean by that, is it really large corporations? Is it senior executives? Is it middle managers? Is it entrepreneurs and small businesses, or does it really not matter?
It actually really doesn't matter, but the bulk of my work financially is going into big medical firms, research firms, and drug firms, and engineering firms, yep. And Facebook, Intuit, Uber, where people need to communicate, and I can teach more people at one time and have a series. They're continuing clients. Privately, all kinds of people. I coached the world champion cage fighter. What do you call that? UFC.
Oh yeah. The cage fighter. That's a good descriptive word.
World champion. And he came in and he's the most terrifying looking guy, and he turned out to be such a cupcake. He was doing a movie, so I got to coach him, and he had to give presentations and interviews and things. So sure. I coached him. I've just coached some amazing people from all over the world. I've just got the greatest job.
Yeah. So while we're having this conversation, just sort of for some reason, Myers-Briggs popped into my brain, as a way of sort of sorting out which quadrant you're in from a communication perspective, et cetera. Is that a tool that you use, or is that an effective tool to help sort of people figure out, or is it really not dependent upon that?
Well, that's actually 3 questions. It is a helpful tool for corporations, and I would not negate that. I don't use it because my approach is an artistic approach, and that requires each individual person delivering their take on a subject and information in their style. That's what audiences want to see. They already know what's in their mind. And that's why actors are riveting, because they got the part for what they bring to the text. And when someone can prepare and become themselves within the character or within the leadership role that they're playing, that's the magnet. Yeah. That's the audience. Being yourself sounds, you hear it all your life, be yourself, be yourself. Well, I'm going to tell people what it takes to be yourself. Courage.
Okay.
Courage. Because when we're facing an audience or facing a camera audience, it feels, our amygdala tells us, that we're facing a tribe of savages that want to cook us and eat us for dinner. That's what's going on inside of our bodies. But when we prepare and get in the present moment, we're ourselves. We're genuinely ourselves. And that is the greatest. That is the greatest. So Myers-Briggs is helpful in other arenas. With me, I'm a director.
Mm-hmm.
Helping an actor play a role.
Got it.
Of leader or communicator. And I want their style. I don't want to show them how to do it. I want them to feel how to do it, to meet their intention with enthusiasm.
Yes. So,
because enthusiasm is contagious, don't you know?
Oh, absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. Yes. Enthusiasm's contagious, and smiling and looking happy is contagious. Right? Yep. So if I just reflect back on myself, there are many times when I'm very comfortable in a one-on-one or, 3 people in a room conversation. I feel very much myself. And when I get into a situation where it's a larger group or I'm in front of an audience, I have a different version of myself. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's not on purpose. It's just sort of what that fear inside of me then transforms the way I think, the way I speak, how fast I speak, etc. when I'm in that other situation. Are there ways that you help me transition that so I can be more, quote unquote, like myself when I'm one-on-one than when I'm in a room with 150 people?
That's a very precise and practiced ability. And when I coached acting, I would have actors chat a bit when they were up in front of the workshop or in a scene that we were working, have them chat a bit, talk a bit. And I would say, go. And they'd go into character and do it. And we call that seamlessly going from chatting and being into character seamlessly. You can't tell that the person is the character, but they are the character. How do we know they're the character? Because we're watching the play. You don't need to show us that you're the character. You need to be it. Now, how do you do it? Or how does one do it? Preparing. There's a wonderful actor who I'm sure you know, Alan Arkin, Academy Award winner, Alan Arkin. And I met Alan years ago, the first time in his improvisation workshops that he used to get. You had to wait to get in, and you got in, and it was wonderful. And I was so intimidated by him. And he was so kind and so wonderful. And we ended up becoming colleagues and doing things together. We're friends to this day. And I know it sounds like a big elephant name drop, but here's the point of this. He helped me with the preparation to get into being myself more than any other coach I ever had, more than any other coworker I ever had. And here's what it was for me. I realized that breathing was important. It sounds like a tuberculosis ward backstage for actors in our dressing rooms. We're breathing, doing whatever we can to get present. But what I realized with Alan was 2 things. First of all, I had to breathe much more deeply into my body than I'd been breathing my whole career. I mean, I had to really breathe. That's the first thing. The second thing is an addition to the word intention. I had for years been using intention. You can't walk, move, talk, act as an actor without knowing your intention.
Yep.
What Alan said to me one time during working a scene was, very good, very good. Now, connect that intention to a strong feeling inside of you. And don't come on stage, take your time, don't come on stage until that intention is connected to a strong feeling in you. And I thought, now I can't go in to the whole story, how I got there. It's in his book. He wrote about me at chapter 17 in his book, called An Improvised Life. It's a darling book. It's a very helpful book. I connected my intention to a feeling that I would have never logically connected it with. And I went on stage, and it was a life-changing acting experience for me. So what I say to you is, find something in your presentation that you have a strong feeling about. Otherwise, give the presentation to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't care about it, why should we?
Right.
You've got to feel strongly about something in that presentation, and that'll be the click.
Yeah.
To be yourself.
Yeah. So let me ask you another question. Is this like getting a polio vaccine where you only need one? I mean, once you kind of learn these techniques, then you're okay? Or is it like the COVID vaccine where, it has a half-life and I need to get a refresher periodically?
Well, let me tell you what, that again is two questions. The first answer is, I love my job because I get people addicted.
Mm-hmm.
Once they feel being in the moment and presenting as themselves with enthusiasm and in their power, they're addicted. And they learn these techniques and they can adjust. What occurs is higher stakes start coming into people's lives. They're getting to the top of the pyramid. Now they're presenting in front of Alibaba. I mean, or this financial firm or the president of the United States. So people come to me for high stakes presentations to help them rehearse and craft the presentation and everything, or if they need a touch up. But I don't want to we'll meet every 2 months at 6:45 and you do that. That's not my thing. My thing is watching the metamorphosis and getting people addicted to the joy of this.
Yeah. Yeah. So since this is a show about entrepreneurship, let's talk a little bit about you starting your business and sort of what that experience was like and, how that sort of happened. Take us down that road a little bit.
I can start since the beginning of time or cut it short. My dad, who was a critical person, said something to me when I was at a low. I was going through a divorce and I didn't want to leave the Bay Area. I had a kid to get through university.
Sure.
and the whole thing. And I called my dad and I was crying. And he listened to me and he was kind of a hard guy. And he said, "You're an entrepreneur. You'll think of something." And I thought, oh my gosh, my dad actually thinks I'm an entrepreneur. I'll think of something. Now, I had created acting workshops and I had founded acting workshops in 4 states
Yes.
but he gave me faith. And then a corporation asked me to come in and they said, "You're an actor. Can you help us with our presentation?" Then I thought, that's it. There's much more discretionary income in corporations and there's a need. And for entrepreneurs, I think that's a critical thing to look at, not what their hopeful notions are, but is there really a need that somebody's going to give you a check
Right.
for giving them? Is there a need? And I know that's fundamental. And then I called the university, an on-site university, and said, "Do you have somebody that could use presentation skills using acting techniques?" And they brought me in. And I remember at my kitchen table creating a curriculum. This is before I got my grad degree, and creating the curriculum. And then that started. And then my dad, God rest his soul, said something else. He said, "Yours is a referral business."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the referrals started because people go to work someplace else, or they get promoted, or they do something else. And that's how it started. And then I needed an assistant, and then I needed a bookkeeper, and then I needed,
Right.
Yeah.
You needed all the things that entrepreneurs need as their business grows.
Yes, yes. And I do want to say this. It comes to my mind now, and I think it must be important for your listeners, or it wouldn't have come to my mind. Fear. Fear of being an entrepreneur. There's fear in everything, but fear in being an entrepreneur can really get in the way. And what I learned is whatever it takes, whatever meditation, whatever friend you've got, whatever therapist you need, whatever class you have to take to get you past that fear, do it, because I've discovered fear is really stupid.
Yeah.
It's really stupid.
Yeah. Someone else, another previous guest on this show, I remember said, taking that first step is the hardest. But once you take it, it turns out the second step's easier and the third step's even easier. But taking that first step is the biggest inhibitor to people doing all sorts of things. That's not just applicable to business, but it's applicable to life in general and the adventures or non-adventures we go on or do not go on. Yes, it's that fear of the unknown and that first step. And, I don't want to fail. I don't want to look bad or whatever it is. But once you take that first step, second one's easier.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
But it doesn't go away. I have to say, for me, I might be more neurotic. I don't know. I don't think I'm that unusual. The fears don't go away. They surface in the most unsuspecting places with the most unsuspecting situations sometimes, but I don't let it get in my way anymore. I've got spunk.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. What do you have a technique for sort of getting over that or coping with it or being able to take that step and try something new? How do you do that?
Well, I have multiple methods. The first thing that comes to mind is I have an incredibly supportive man in my life for the last 24 years who is an unbelievably gifted listener. So he'll listen to me complain or kvetch. I'm afraid. A big one that comes to mind is I had to ask somebody for something, and I'm not a big asker. I'd rather give than ask somebody. It's that mishigas, as we say. And I was complaining, and it wasn't a small ask. And I was complaining for about 2 weeks. And Bill put his hands on my shoulders one morning and looked me in the eyes and said, "You have to call him today." Mm-hmm. So to have a supportive person is real important. The other is I meditate, and if somebody prays, prayer is great. That focus is a meditation.
Yeah.
I read books, meditation books in the morning, and I'll look up fear and how to walk through fear. And sometimes I just have to do it. I just have to say it.
Yeah.
And saying no is big for women.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned how to say no. No, thank you. No is a sentence. It doesn't often need an explanation.
Right.
So
yeah,
not saying anything new, but those are all just a few of some of the things I need to do to get through fear.
Oh, very good. Very good. Hey, we've been at this for over 35 minutes now, so I want to start thinking about wrapping it up. Is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't?
I don't know. I can tell people that the best book they'll ever read is themselves, and do whatever it takes to get into as many present moments as possible, especially before you present, and so you can be yourself.
Yeah. Very good. It's a great conclusion to our conversation. I really appreciate you being on the podcast, Billie. Thank you very much.
You're a blessing. Thanks, Bella.
Bela, well, that was indeed an interesting interview. So a really fascinating conversation. It went. There were a lot of different dimensions of what you two talked about. What did you find most interesting and important about your conversation with Billie?
Number one, I think the takeaway for me is that this stuff can be learned, right? It's just like with anything, right? You can take adding numbers, or you can take being a tennis player. There are some people that are just naturally good at those types of things, but the rest of us can learn those skills, and communicating and talking in front of a group, standing up in front of an audience and communicating and getting your point across and getting people to listen. Some people have that natural skill for whatever reasons, right? It's just wonderful. But the rest of us can learn that. And it's a learnable skill that we can all do. And it's not something we teach any place, right? We don't teach unless you're a communications major, right? You probably learn how to do that. But in all of the other kind of courses we take, I know certainly in engineering, clearly they never taught us any of those types of skills. So you can learn that, and you need to go to a coach, and you can improve your skills there. And I think there was two other takeaways I got from this, from talking to her, particularly from the point of view of acting. When I watch movies or I watch actors, I'm often amazed by sort of their level of being engaged in the moment. They are clearly in that scene, and they're totally immersed in it, emotionally and physically, and the total concentration and focus that it takes for them. And I'll tell you, one of the challenges I have is, my focus is that like of a 2-year-old. It's about 15 seconds at the most. But here again, it's something you can learn. It's something you can improve. And I think, to me, those were the big takeaways. Number one, this is learnable. Number two, you really need to be engaged in the moment and focused and totally concentrated on what you're doing.
Totally agree, Bela. And I think it's one of these things that needs refining. It's like writing. You learn to write once, but I think when you get feedback and you really think about it, you can be continuously improving your writing over time. And I think communication skills, even more so, that we need to keep brushing up on them. So even if you take a class in it 10 years ago, I think it's still important to consciously be aware of how you're communicating. And this is, I tell my students, the best thing you can do is record yourself on video when you're preparing for a talk. And there's some short-term things you can fix and some long-term things. And to kind of bounce off what you said about total concentration and focus, the best speakers, they're not only concentrating and focusing on what comes out of their mouth, which is hard enough for me, but it's also eye contact and hand position and body posture and where your feet are and how you're moving around in space, either too much or not enough, and it's bad, right? So it's not only this total concentration and focus about what's coming out of your mouth, it's all these other pieces at the same time. So I do think it's kind of like juggling and riding a bike and chewing gum at the same time, or some such thing like that, where there's so many different moving pieces, and you change one piece and the whole dynamic can shift. So
yeah.
So I liked it. I really liked, she broke it down to 4 components. And I guess this really resonated with me, playing off what I just said, is that one is, where's your body kind of in space? And whether we're online or in person, where are you positioned relative to your speakers? Are you in a position where you can be paying attention to them and being engaged? And like you said, this total focus in the moment. Voice, obviously that's the obvious one. And this ability to improvise, I think that she talked about improvisation, and I know that we've talked about this before in the podcast, like you said, but the ability to speak extemporaneously, to adjust what you say, whether it's a question or the body language of the people that you're speaking to, or there's a loud noise and something happens, or a baby starts crying or what have you. The ability to improvise and adjust is something where if you know your material and you know where you're at and you know who you're talking with, you can usually find a smooth way to move around whatever obstacle gets kind of thrown in your way, or whatever opportunity comes your way to bring something up that might be relevant and important.
Yeah. As you were saying that, it got me thinking about, as professors, we stand up in front of class all the time. And I've given lots of presentations in my career in life. And I often will get comments on the content of the talk that I gave, but I cannot recall ever getting a comment about, gee, you walk around too much, or, you weren't focused on the audience. I never got sort of comments or feedback on the style, right? Or the things that sort of Billie was talking about. You talk too fast or you talk too slow. Your hand gestures were, distracting, etc. No, I never got feedback on that stuff. Always got feedback on, not always, but frequently get feedback on the content, but not on these things. So I think it's, number one, it's also a difficult thing for people to give you feedback on. And even I think about people who mentored me and my bosses in the past when they've seen me give talks, again, rarely give you feedback on this notion of how the overall package was. So I think that's another kind of takeaway that we can all be better at. And, if you have a friend or say, hey, look, are you aware that you're doing this when you're on stage, or are you aware that you're doing this when you're talking to groups of people?
Yeah, I've had students count my ums or my likes or knows. And that's where I knew I needed to up my game a little bit as a young teacher when I was early in my teaching career. So yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there to unpack, and you have to do it, as she said, with intentionality. Know your intention going in, and I think you kind of the corollary of what you just said. Sometimes what you say is less important than how you say it, or what you say gets lost because of how you say it. These are important things. So, I liked how she adapted her methods for online meetings. And again, we do so much of this now that we need to remember in terms of, and I really have been working with my students on this, eye contact with the camera. You tend to look down right below the camera to read your notes, but then it looks like you're not looking at the audience. So you lose the connection. And I loved what she said about turning the slides off for a while so you can look right at the camera. And the slides go away and there's a bigger picture of your head essentially, right? But you're engaging more. Sitting back far enough away from the camera so that you can see your hands a little bit. And again, you don't want to be waving wildly like like somebody's out of control, but sometimes some hand motions can really emphasize the points that you're making and try to connect even though you're in 2-dimensional rather than 3-dimensional space. So I thought that was really cool. Did any of Billie's points kind of strike a chord with you about how your communication style has changed over the years?
Well, it certainly has gotten me more conscious about, these online meetings and sort of trying to focus more on looking into the camera. Because again, when you're talking to a person face to face, you're looking at their face, right? So it's easy, that eye contact skill I work on in a normal conversation. I've developed that to where I feel like it's reasonable. But this whole new camera thing's a whole different thing, because when I'm looking at your image on the screen in front of me, it's not where the camera is. It's below the camera. So my natural tendency is I want to look at you, but then it makes it look like I'm not looking at you. So, it always seemed to me as I thought about this, someone needs to come out with a screen where the camera is in the middle of the screen, not at the top of the screen, right? It's embedded in a tiny little dot in the middle of, my 12-inch screen or whatever biggest screen you have. And that way, when I'm looking at the screen, I'm looking right into the camera, right? It's like the teleprompter on TV, right? They have that part figured out. So as the news people are reading the news, it looks like they're looking right into the camera because they are. The teleprompter is set up in such a way. And I think given all of these sort of online meetings we're doing, that's a great business idea, Mike.
Let's patent it. Let's go, dude. I think it's a winner, because I know I always put I have your window right up underneath the camera, as close as I can get it, so that you take advantage of the proximity of your image to the lens of the camera. But it's not always possible to do that.
Yeah,
and it's still not perfect.
The other thing that I talked to Billie about, which I thought was pretty good, was this notion of managing your inner fears, right? Your sort of anxiety of getting on stage, and how this notion of, we didn't talk a lot about it, but this notion of taking those deep breaths, right? The types of things that you might do in meditation or in yoga to sort of prepare yourself for that, what you're going to undertake. And I can remember there was a series on TV, I think on PBS a number of years ago, where they interviewed actors and they talked about how they prepared for a role and sort of what they did. And I remember them talking about these notions of, for the 30 seconds before they go in front of the camera, they have this private moment for themselves where they go through their own, and everyone sort of did it differently, but they go through their own kind of way of getting into and focused on what they're about getting ready to do and being able to relax and flow with that flow, like you said earlier, that you need to adjust. You can't just read the script, right? You need to be able to react to what's going on in a particular, whether it's you're acting in a scene or whether you're on stage, and how the audience is reacting in that give and take. So I thought that was another takeaway for me.
Yeah. And, Bela, you got to kind of think about and again, this goes back to Billie's discussion of intention. Sometimes you're giving a talk where it's one way, right? I'm giving the listeners the information. But in a lot of situations, whether it's a class or a meeting or some sort of, you're asking for interaction. And then that's a whole nother set of cues where, especially with sometimes the delays involved in the digital technology, you have to pause a little more and give people a chance to interact and to jump in and really to ask for it, because the body language doesn't always tell, hey, I want to hear from you now. You have to really prompt and cue people to engage. Yeah,
excellent. What do you think? We should wrap this one up?
Yeah, thanks. You got some great tips, and I'm definitely using a bunch of those. So yeah, I think listeners, thanks for joining us today. We hope you got some tips and some ideas, and we hope that you found this episode with Billie Shepard interesting and thought-provoking. If you have questions about what we've discussed, as always, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com.
And please do follow the podcast if you haven't already. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you soon, Mike.
Thanks, Bela, from over here in Münster, Germany. See you next time.